questions were allowed. Good old Labour Party democracy. And a D notice was put on even that pathetic answer. By the time Churchill came to power in October 1951, plants had been built already at Springfields, Capenhurst, Windscale and Aldermaston, and technical support establishments set up at Harwell and Risley, and expenditure of over £100 million successfully concealed from the House of Commons. The party of the people had spoken, or rather it hadn't spoken, and the new Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, continued the good work. The first British atomic device, which when I was writing this, notice the acronym for which was BAD, was tested at Montebello Islands, 50 miles off the coast of Australia, on the 3rd of October 1952. And on the 24th of October, and this is from Hansard again, Churchill acknowledged his gratitude to the Labour Party with these words: "All those concerned in the production of the first British atomic bomb are to be warmly congratulated on the successful outcome of an historic episode, and I should no doubt pay my compliments to the leader of the opposition of the party opposite for initiating it." And on hearing this praise from Churchill, Attlee, of whom Churchill had once scathingly remarked, "An empty taxi pulled up and Clement Attlee got out," bowed and smiled his thanks from the Labour benches. But there's more to the story than those facts. If I was just here to knock old Attlee, that would be pie easy. But in fairness, the wheels of the atomic development in the UK were already turning some time before Attlee came to power. And we must remember, it's hard to remember sometimes, but British scientists led the world in nuclear technology in 1940. It was a pair of British scientists who initially demonstrated, contrary to what Einstein believed, that an atomic bomb could be made small enough to be dropped on an aeroplane. Guess what? A high-powered secret committee was set up and held their first meeting on April the 10th, 1940 in Burlington House, headquarters of the Royal Society. One of the members of that committee, a man who was to play a very important role, was called John Cockcroft. He had been a protege of Ernest Rutherford at the Cavendish Laboratories in Cambridge. 2 months after the committee was formed, its chairman chose a new name for it in order to disguise its activities. They loved this. And it was called the Maud Committee. And writing this, I noticed that was an anagram of "you mad." It all seems very ironic, doesn't it? There's a nice little story behind the choice of that name. Few telling this story actually get it entirely correct, but this is the correct version, I assure you. Maud Ray was a governess who had once taught the children of the great Danish physicist Niels Bohr, and she lived in Kent. Another physicist, Lisa Meitner, once sent a perfectly innocent cable to a friend which read as follows: "Met Niels and Margaret recently, both well, but unhappy about recent events. Please inform John Cockcroft and Maud Ray, Kent." When it was passed on to Cockcroft, because of the paranoia and panic of the time, and in view of what he had heard about the German interest in atomic matters, he jumbled it around and decided that Maud Ray, Kent, was an anagram for radium taken. And he immediately sent this letter telling another physicist, James Chadwick, all about this terrible news. And so the committee's name was actually this, in joke, they called it Maud. They loved all that when they were planning to blow up the world. Maud Committee was to ascertain how quickly a bomb could be made, and it concluded that a uranium bomb could indeed be made by the end of the war. Work on the route to producing a uranium bomb began in Britain, another secret project, I'm afraid, codenamed Tube Alloys. Later, for reasons of safety, was taken to the Manhattan Project in America and incorporated there. It was agreed to proceed on the basis, very important this, of shared knowledge and joint development, a partnership. In fact, it was called Tube Alloys Joint Venture. Tube Alloys being the code for the atomic bomb. In 1944, John Cockcroft took over the running of the Cavendish laboratory, which had been moved to Montreal. There his team carried on research adjunct to the Tube Alloys program in the Manhattan Project. The research he headed in Canada anticipated the Labour government's decision to build an atomic bomb. And the man in charge of that research, a man called John Anderson, directed all of it, told his staff in January exactly that. He said it had probably been already decided before the team even left Canada. The bomb was going to be built. And incidentally, the Soviet Union, this is also important as you'll see later, had at least 20 agents working in the Canadian project, including the most significant, the physicist Alan May Nunn, who was recruited by none other than Donald Maclean, who also worked over there. One of the things that Attlee became acquainted with after becoming Prime Minister was, yes, another secret committee, of which he was ignorant, a secret agreement, and not publicly revealed this one until 12 years later. And it was called the Quebec Agreement. And it took place between Churchill and Roosevelt. Again, in many books and pamphlets, a popular misconception of this is given. It's said that it didn't take place in Quebec at all, but in Washington, and it was given that name as another joke, just because it was scribbled on a piece of paper headed the Citadel, Quebec. That is untrue. In fact, there were two Quebec meetings. The first, on the 1st of August 1943, which this first most important agreement was made, was in Quebec, and the second was in Washington. The first was the most important, and it had three main clauses. Well, what they thought were main clauses. They weren't really what the British thought were important. First, they agreed never to use this agency, the projected atomic bomb, against each other. Second, they agreed not to use it against third parties without each other's consent. Third, they agreed that neither of them would communicate any information about the Tube Alloys program to any third parties except by mutual consent. What that meant, in plain language, point one, not using it against each other. If it came to the crunch, the United States could certainly employ it against the United Kingdom, but alas, the United Kingdom were not able then, nor are they now, nor have they ever been able to launch an attack with atomic weapons upon the United States. So it was completely meaningless. Point two, mutual consent before use. Yes, that really is true. The US really did seek British consent, not generally acknowledged, before they dropped the bomb